Fire up, machine. Let's go. Starting the show today with then candidate Joe Biden. Go, Mr. Biden.
I've never spoken to my son about drug safety.
And so how do you know?
Here's what I know. I know Trump.
All right, folks. Welcome to GAMcast for July 24th, 2023. Breaking down the news of the day through the lens of the law, the Constitution, and histoire, otherwise known as history. Kind of a little bit of a big news day today, but I think we can get through it pretty quick. A lot of it is just easily debunkable stuff, but we'll get you up to speed on it. Anyway, that was then candidate Joe Biden saying, I never spoke to my son about my business dealings. And we're going to hear a little bit more of the clip. He's talking to Peter Doocy, then it's on the trail. And they've been playing this song and dance since he started this. Now, I want you to think about where we were and where we are now, because it's important sometimes to go back and learn from your history. By way of example, I'm reading about, as you know, I'm trying to read a biography of all the presidents. It goes under my fiction, fun fiction, or classic fiction, fun fiction, and then nonfiction. This is in the nonfiction phase where I am. And I'm reading about Thomas the Jefferson and learning about, he's just finished writing the Declaration of Independence. He's now the governor of Virginia. And you just, there's so much you can learn from going back and looking at history in the proper context. And so we can do it ourselves with our own lives here. This is 3 years ago, approximately, a little bit more and a little bit less, somewhere in that neighborhood. And here he was starting with one of the dumbest lies. I mean, when he said it, did you really believe it? I never spoke to my son about his business dealings. How's that even possible? How's it even possible? He's the vice president of the United States. His son is on the board of Burisma. He goes over there to Ukraine, where his son is on the board and working, and says, hey, if you don't fire this prosecutor who's looking into my son. I mean, how in the world, again, I've said it, I think I said it on one of the weekly podcasts, which, by the way, we do a weekly podcast, and we're going to keep doing it. Anyway, so I think it may have been on the Saturday podcast. I can't remember. But, this guy actually spends a fair amount of time with his son. And we've seen him recently, even though politically it would be a bad idea to have him around. And you might say, hey, you know what, Hunter? Yeah, I love you, man. But just, 2 or 3 months away from the family would be good for you. No. He's front and center around all the time. So you can't even pretend you don't talk to the guy a lot. Anyway, here's kind of what the hoax was. Is I never spoke to my son and then immediately pivot. So, here's a stupid lie, and then pivot. And here was the pivot.
Deserves to be investigated. He is violating every basic norm of a president. You should be asking him the question, why is he on the phone with a foreign leader trying to intimidate a foreign leader?
Yeah, I didn't do anything, and it's Trump who's breaking every law, every norm. Now, look at where we are. And in about 20 or 30 minutes when I finish the show, and I hope to do it under 40 today, I want you to how prescient that was, because I didn't do anything wrong, and then, he's breaking every norm known to man. When we get to the January 6th stuff and the Trump criminal stuff, which we'll get to near the end of the show, it's amazing how he predicted exactly where things would go with Trump. Anyway, here's the news about Biden, which is why he started the show today. This is from our friend over there at Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton. You can find him on Twitter at Tom Fitton. Hunter Biden put then VP Dad Joe on the phone with business associates at least 24 times, ex-partner Devin Archer to testify today to Congress, where the Oversight Committee is researching this stuff. And folks, it ain't going to make a difference. It's just a waste of time. Here's real data. Here's real evidence. And I mean, one of the things that the left has done in the last couple of years has just eviscerated the term evidence. When they say there's no evidence, really, that just means there's evidence, but we don't like it. Or there's evidence, but it's not absolutely conclusively proof. What would that be? Well, what Biden admitted it maybe. Even that wouldn't do it, as we're going to see. But, folks, it isn't going to matter, because it'll matter when people start to take it seriously. When one party does it and the other party just completely ignores it, and when that other party happens to have control of every single solitary institution known to man, right? Then it doesn't matter. And that's just the reality. So we're going to move on. It's unfortunate, but you're literally living through the revelation of one of the biggest corruption scandals of all time. And, it's interesting. I said it. I know I said this on the Saturday podcast, but it's interesting because the precursor to that was the Clinton Foundation. I mean, they kind of started it, and that's where Biden obviously got the idea. And then Biden's whole corruption scheme is a poor man's Hillary Clinton's machine. But anyway, that's just the way it goes. All right, so moving on. So one of the things they're doing out there is they gotta spend a lot of their time. Basically the press spends its time spinning for Democrats, right? We know that. But what does that basically boil down to, as we see? What it boils down to is a third of the time, because the Democrats have gotten to be so incompetent and they lack so much talent, you spend a lot of your time covering up for their messes. Think Kamala if you want to understand that one. Number two, because the leaders have gotten so corrupt, they spend another third of the time covering up for the corruption. That's what they're doing with Biden, right? So they got to spend a lot of their time. The Republicans give you perfectly decent evidence that if you had even a remotely as close evidence against Trump, oh my God, he'd be in jail by now. I mean, because this real evidence, if they had anything about like Trump, he'd be gone. But nope, another time doing that. Then they spend a third of their time trying to smear other people and to tell you what to think about. I was at the bar yesterday. My routine on Sundays is I get up, I work out, and then I usually play 18 holes. And so after that, it's usually I play a mid-morning game, so we tee off around 11:30. I'm finished around 3:30, 4 o'clock. Just perfect to go to a bar, sit and watch the end of a golf tournament, end of a football game, something like that, and then slide on into dinner a little later. And there's a bar I go to, and yesterday a couple of buddies of mine were up there. And I just happened to run into him. We went into the bar, had a couple of beers, and I hadn't seen the one guy in a long time. These are two friends I met through a cousin of mine. They're all played hockey together, and we now run in some of the same circles. And I know they're political. I know their political affiliation. I went to one of them and I said, "Hey, man, who you favor in the Republican Party?" Tim Scott. I'm like, you don't favor Tim Scott. Give me a break. Well, I mean, I just feel like if we nominate Tim Scott, then then some of this racism stuff, they'll just calm it down for a little while. And I said, okay, A, you don't like Tim Scott. Okay, just stop with that. And then B, it's never going to stop. The Republican, and I'm not a Republican, but he is. And you could nominate Martin Luther King, and I'm not exaggerating. Right, it isn't good. The Republican Party could nominate Ibram X. Kendi, and it's still not going to stop. It's never going to stop, people, ever in our lifetimes. It's not. Forget about it. So just move on. So we got to the point. I said, well, who do you really like? Trump. I'm like, why didn't you just say that, right? And then my other friend, I see him a lot more often, and I said, who do you favor? DeSantis. I'm like, you don't favor DeSantis. Anyway, long story short, finally get to the point. Who do you really favor? Trump. Now, why didn't you guys just say that? And the reason they didn't say it is the culture. The third that when they've cleaned up for the incompetence and the corruption, the third that they do to basically create the narrative. Bill Clinton was the master of this. He was the start of where this is. Everything is narrative driven. And so you are conditioned to think, well, I better not say Trump. You are conditioned to think, well, the reason we lost the midterms and didn't take the Senate, we had some bad candidates. Herschel Walker is just not very smart. And I get into conversations with people and go, but I'm not voting for Herschel to build a rocket to go to space, or like Oppenheimer to build a nuclear weapon to defeat the Nazis. He's just got to go up to the Senate, for Christ's sakes. Right? What do I care if he's smart? And besides which, are you telling me that Fossil they elected up in Pennsylvania is a Rhodes Scholar? Give me a break. That has been put into our brains. And so this is exactly what this story about DeSantis is. Okay, under DeSantis, Floridians died at a higher rate than residents of almost any other state during the Delta wave of COVID. With 7% of the nation's population, Florida accounted for 14% of the deaths from July to October. Now, folks, your hoax alert should be going off. You know why? Because you're reading the news from the mainstream media. It's all it is. It's all fake all the time, 24/7, 365. This is an easy one if you have any training and any logic at all. Why are you just focusing on July and October and some blip that happened? I wonder why. Right? Are you accounting here in this headline for the fact that Florida has, as populations go, a much older population than most people? We know there were two big risks for COVID. What were they? Obesity and being older. Right? Those were the two biggies. So right off the bat, I can see the hoax. But, here's the thing that the New York Crimes commonly does. I thought I clicked the article. If you click the article, for those of you watching on YouTube or Twitter or later Rumble, by the way, if you're listening on Rumble, please subscribe, and YouTube, same thing. Subscribe and hit the like button. It'll help us out a lot. Anyway, if you scroll down, which I had to read this entire tag-blamed article, and it did. If you scroll down, you'll see the graph. And if those of you listening, here's the graph. Florida started out well below the United States generally, right? And then it scrolls, and then it kind of mirrors the United States. Then this one little period, there's a huge blip where Florida skyrockets, okay, for about 4 months. And then after the 4 months, Florida then plummets and finishes well below the United States average. So that just debunks the entire thing of the story. They didn't do worse at all. In fact, it turns out they did better overall if you read the article and look at the data, and they just cherry pick evidence. And then if you read the article, which I did, the problem here was that DeSantis had a slight switch in policy right around the time that the vaccine came out. They had a spike for God only knows what reason. Only two people know. The Chinese that created the virus and God. That's it. Nobody else knows why that thing acted the way it did. But anyway, don't believe the hoax. What's the real story here? We got to attack DeSantis. Why? Because, well, we spend 90% of our time attacking Trump, 9% attacking DeSantis, and then 1% attacking whoever else there is to attack. And folks, if you think it's Trump, if you think it's DeSantis, don't worry. If you nominate Tim Scott like my friend wants, they'll make Tim Scott out to be Hitler too. Believe me. We've seen that now. We've seen this movie before. All right. So this is one of the stories that's a real story that I wanted to get to. This I unfortunately saw over the weekend, and it ruined, I think I saw it on about hole 14, and it ruined the rest of the round. I'm kidding. Nothing ruins my life. But anyway, I was bummed out by it because, you would think people would learn, but they're not. And the thing I always tell you about polls, you have to take them with a grain of salt because we are so hoaxed. Our information structure is so bad now, you can't trust almost anybody, except me, of course. But you can't almost trust anybody with information. But setting that aside and assuming this poll accurately in some way reflects the data that people are getting, this is disappointing. Because one of the good things that has come out of the Trump era is now we understand that institutions are corrupted. And we understand how corrupt they are. We get it. We now are more able to appreciate that if somebody gets indicted by the FBI, it's like, well, it's the FBI. I mean, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago, if it was some jurisdiction, I might have questioned it. But, if it was the FBI, I kind of felt like it was more or less on the up and up. Now I know it's not. So anyway, the damaged brands of America's two political parties. This comes from the Liberal Patriot, which is my friend Roy Teixeira out there. Love him. Former Democrat, actually still a Democrat, but is an old pollster from the Clinton days. And he, like Mark Penn has now kind of gone over to the other side, but Teixeira still considers himself a Democrat. But he normally puts out pretty good pieces and criticizes the Democrat Party. He's joined now with John Halpern, who's kind of going back to the roots. He's very kind of corruptible. He actually wrote this article. But anyway, here's the point of the article I want to go through before I move on. Majorities of voters believe Democrats and Republicans are too extreme on both economic and cultural issues. Right? Now, I'm going to cut to the chase because I'm trying to make these shows a little bit shorter because the last couple of days we've gone into an hour and it taxes me, and it's just a little bit too long, I think, for a podcast. I think 40 minutes is a little better. But anyway, what's going on here is, and this is, again, how you're being hoaxed, okay, that for whatever reason, the reality of what's going on, and if you follow politics closely, and I have for almost 50 years, I'm just telling you, this is the absolute fact. On almost every issue, the Republican Party has stood pat. It's maybe moved a little bit to the right on abortion, maybe a little bit to the right on gun control, but other than that, and that's arguable, other than that, it's pretty much the same where it's been. And don't take my word for it. Go look at any policy perspective today, and go look at any policy perspective in Reagan's day, Nixon's day, etc. That's what you're going to see. What's happened is the Democrat Party has lurched hugely to the left. And it really started with Obama. But with Biden, it's really, really, really gone left of left. The latest example we covered in the last couple of days, where, for example, it used to be if there was a racial disparity, they would try to piece together a few other things and say, well, this disparity plus this, and this, there's racial discrimination against black people. Now they don't even do that. Any racial disparity is racism per se. That's moving to the left. That's basically getting rid of logic and reason, which is what leftism is. Leftism is just a raw power grab. You can call it fascism. You can call it socialism. You can call it democratic socialism, which is a non sequitur and moronic. you can call it communism, whatever you want to call it. That's what it is. It's basically people take power and then do not apply reason and logic and the rule of law. That's what it is. And unfortunately, the Democrat Party is doing that, and it's only by comparison to where they are that you can even make an argument that the Republican Party has moved. It's not, right? And the fact that people don't understand that they're being hoaxed is really sad. So anyway, here's the highlight of the article, a little bit of a white pill here. Democrats receive slightly worse marks than Republicans in both areas, which means voters do apparently appreciate that it's the Democrats that are more extreme than the Republicans, but not as much as you would think. Okay, for example, 56% of voters think Democrats have moved too far left on economic issues compared to 51% of voters who think the same of Republicans. Likewise, 58% think Democrats have moved too far to the left on cultural and social issues compared to 54% of Republicans who've moved too far right. Name a cultural issue that the Republicans have moved to the right on. I mean, it's really crazy. But anyway, it's too bad that people aren't getting it. But anyway, that is where we are, I suppose. We shall see if that improves in the coming days. And again, with the caveat that poll could have been rigged easily. But again, if it's correct, that's bad. So you're going to hear a lot today about Barbie, Oppenheimer. Hollywood is back. Hollywood is great. Let me break it down for you real quickly what's going on. We don't know whether Oppenheimer or Barbie are hits yet. They had decent opening weekends. We do know that. But in order for it to be a blockbuster hit and all this other stuff, you have to go on for months of this, okay? And we know that Harrison Ford and the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones movie, it had a big bump and then it's since busted. So this is the typical thing they do. They take and cherry pick one piece of data. You had a good weekend. And by the way, a lot of these numbers you're looking at, I've noticed this, are worldwide. That really throws a loop into things, right? Another thing you have to consider is both of these movies have huge marketing budgets. Huge. Okay? So Barbie made a lot of money, yeah, but they also marketed the heck out of it. Same thing with Oppenheimer, but Barbie even dwarfed what Oppenheimer got. Okay? So that all at the end of the day, figuring out whether it's truly going to be a blockbuster, you have to take a look at that. So why, you have to ask yourself, and I do this, why are they telling me this? Why, when they don't know yet if it's a blockbuster, if they don't know yet if it's a success, why are they telling you that, right? Well, it could be because there's a writer's strike out there and they want to convince and set the subtle message out there that, oh, Hollywood's making tons of money. Look, you got these blockbuster, by the way, notice they're not talking about breaking any records. You would think you would see that. Notice they're not talking about adjusting for inflation, right? This is the hoax. And the question is, what's behind the hoax? Why are they doing it? Well, again, the Hollywood strike, I think, is part of it because they want to give workers a little bit of a boost and create the impression that, oh, you guys have plenty of money. You can pay people more. Number two, Barbie is very woke. I haven't seen it yet, nor will I. But from what people I read and people I trust, they say there's a lot of woke messages in there. They say there's a transgender character. There's just a lot of things in the book, which is fine. But of course, that's what the left will try to tell you. Look, it's successful, therefore people like woke. Like, man, I'm not so sure those things correlate. And again, it's a little early to tell. You can't use this week. Why you brought it up? Then when I was doing my reading, I clicked on this from the Associated Press. Greta Gerwig's Barbie claimed the top box office spot with a massive $162 million in sales from North America theaters. That's not just the biggest opening of the year. It's the best start ever for a film directed by a woman. And I thought, oh, that's one of the reasons you're making it out to be a big deal. And again, I hate that I even had to say that, and I literally just saw that about 15 minutes ago. I had no idea it was directed by a woman. I guess if I'd have thought about it, it shouldn't surprise me. And it's fine. If she did a great job, I got no problem with that, right? But the idea, that's part of the reason you're seeing the hype, okay? All right, so in other news out there, I saw this in my feed. Professors urge Biden to defy mistaken rulings by MAGA Supreme Court justices. And this I had noticed a couple of days ago. This is one of those things, they just planted the seed, right? And they hope it's going to germinate and take root and then grow up into be a big tree. This is what they want to do, right? So it's completely idiotic, all right? But this is what Democrats often do. So let's see if I got the story. I don't have the story open. Let me open it. So if you open the story, you'll find that apparently it's Harvard law professor Mark Tushnet and San Francisco State University political scientist Aaron Belkin penned an open letter to the Biden administration on popular constitutionalism to respond to what it called not a normal court following high-profile cases. We urge President Biden to restrain MAGA justices. There's only 3, folks. What about the other 6? But anyway, immediately by announcing that if and when they issue rulings that are based on gravely mistaken interpretations of the Constitution that undermine our most fundamental commitments, the administration will be guided by its own constitutional interpretations. Folks, again, reading Thomas the Jefferson, we're not there yet, but he will be a major part of this issue. It is funny how history repeats. He will be a major part of this because he will defeat John Adams, right, in the 4th presidential election in the United States. John Adams will spend a lot of his remaining days in office right up until the time that Jefferson takes the seat, issuing all sorts of writs and giving federal jobs. He will give one to Mr. Marbury to be, I think, a justice of the peace or a judge of some kind. I can't recall. Anyway, when Thomas Jefferson and a guy named Madison come in, you'll remember him. He later becomes president, but he's the Secretary of State. They find this appointment of Mr. Marbury. And they say, well, too late for you, buddy. They didn't deliver it to you. I'm not giving you your commission. Well, Marbury sued Madison and said, that's not the way it works. He signed it, right? I get my little position. What are you talking about? Makes it all the way to the Supreme Court, which was at that time headed by the 3rd Chief Justice of the United States. That would be John Marshall, one of the most consequential Supreme Court justices, Chief Justices of all time. He says, oh, no. Once the president signs it, becomes a commission, and you are entitled to it, whether it is delivered or not. But that's not what the case is famous for. Every law student and every lawyer knows the case of Marbury versus Madison, not for the factual presentation I just gave you, but for this. Later in the decision, even though it's called dicta, it really isn't important for the decision. He says, obviously, it's for the Supreme Court to determine what the Constitution means. Well, before that, people like Thomas Jefferson have said, no, that's not the way it works. The legislative branch, they interpret the Constitution. The executive branch, we interpret the Constitution. The Supreme Court, you have a vote too. It's kind of, we all interpret the Constitution as we please. Well, John Marshall said, no, we do it. And you know what Jefferson did? He obeyed what Marshall said. And since then, that ended the debate about what these people are talking about, right? So one of them is a Harvard law professor. You think he doesn't know the case of Marbury versus Madison? We're talking, again, back in the 1700s. Well, it would have been early 1800s. Are you kidding me? I mean, he knows that. Now, does it have some other historical underpinnings? Yes, it does. I can't remember the name of the case, but the Cherokee, I believe, they sued over a treaty over some land in Georgia, and they claimed they had the right to it. A bunch of American settlers claimed that they didn't and wanted them off the land because I think there was gold there. I can't recall. But anyway, it led to the Trail of Tears because the Supreme Court, John Marshall, same John Marshall that I just told you about, he said they did have a treaty and that the government couldn't kick them off. And Andrew Jackson, who was the president at the time, famously said, Marshall's made his decision. Now let's see him enforce it. And what he was talking about is, hey, I'm the executive branch, and he can make decisions all he wants, but I'm not going to enforce it, right? And so you get into a little bit of a constitutional crisis at times. But these guys aren't talking about one situation, one issue where the two branches disagree, right? They're talking about basically the end of democracy, the end of constitutional government. Now, folks, this is where it starts. Little letter, little thing here, and then it goes. It's beyond idiotic. I mean, they're not even pretending that they're constitutional. And by the way, before I move on to the next topic, I want you to understand that the thing that ticks them off is Dobbs, right? Getting rid of Roe v. Wade, which is never a good decision. But believe me, they're upset about affirmative action. They're upset about the student loans, right? Because those two things hugely impact them. Believe me, they're mad about not doing the website for the transgender folks too, or I forget what they were, gay, whatever they were. But they're upset about that too. But believe me, it's the affirmative action and the not being able to just with a pen get rid of people's debt. And they are also conflicted because the affirmative action was a policy they were implementing, right? And they obviously favored. And number two, what do you think? You think they want people pushing back? And one of the few checks on all this idiotic money that we're just pouring into these universities is that people actually have to take out loans. right? I mean, it is a crime what has happened to people. And believe me, this is hard for me to say because I was a product of public education all my life. And I used loans to get through law school, right? And it has been one of the best economic decisions I've ever made in my life, both in terms of financial and the classical education that I possess that you obviously can tell by listening to this podcast. So it's hard for me to say that it's bad, but I got a good deal. These people are being ripped off. And we're going to cover that a little bit more as the show goes on. So, all right, so now we're to the Trump and January 6th news, and there's a lot of it. A lot of it. And we're going to go through 3 bits here. And I'm looking at the clock. I may make 40 minutes today, folks, which is good. All right, so we got to go through a lot of January 6th news, but remember, this is how you got to interpret your news nowadays, right? Mostly it's a narrative. Mostly it's a hoax. What's behind the hoax? If you want to know the truth, the easy way to do that is pretty much anything the left or Democrats are saying, the opposite is true. Trump's a criminal. The opposite's true. They've looked at him so hard for so long, and they still don't have anything. What does that tell you? You just sniff the surface of Biden, and you see criminality everywhere, right? Anyway, here's what I'm going to cut to the chase. Here's why you're seeing all this January 6th stuff, right? And this is purposeful, right? This is something on CNN from yesterday, it looks like. And I can't remember the guy's name, but anyway, he's on there. He's got the 2 fossils, Woodward and Bernstein, who haven't done anything useful in like 40 years. Anyway, he's got those 2 on. So that's a tell. Why'd you put them on? I mean, this isn't like an accident. It's not like, hey, what are we going to do? I don't know. Why don't you get Woodward and Bernstein? I mean, that's a good piece. Everybody love that segment. No. They planned this in advance. You think I'm kidding? Well, Jen Circleback Psaki, she was out there yesterday. She ran with January 6th and MSNBC. So you got 3 different, well, two out of 3, two different networks here. These people brought out conservative former federal judge Michael Luttig, who nobody ever heard of until the January 6th committee. I literally went over, they dug his grave up, right? They did a Weekend at Bernie's thing, and they put him in front of the camera. We're going to get to him. That's how bad he is. He is awful. Like, in my little pinky toe, I have more ability to communicate than he does now. He might have been great when he was younger. Nobody would run this stuff up the flagpole. But anyway, why are you seeing all the January 6th? The answer, the Trump January 6th indictment is around the corner. That's why. I guarantee it. He'll be indicted this week. I predict it. I may be wrong. Hope I am. If I am, I don't have any trouble admitting I'm wrong. He will be indicted this week for January 6th. And just so you know, it's not going to be January 6th and the riot. It's going to be January 6th. Well, I'll get to that. Anyway, so let's listen to the 2 fossils here, Woodward and Bernstein, talking about Donald Trump and January 6th. Now, why would we be talking about January 6th? It's 2.5 years ago. It's Sunday night in America. Why talk about what in the world? Anyway, here we go.
How do you see this delay question playing out?
But I think we need to cut to the chase here about what all of these proceedings are about. They are about a criminal president of the United States who attempted a coup, who tried...
Now, see, they're talking about the boxes hoax. What about this delayed, made, what about this? He pivots immediately January 6th. That was obviously by design.
Take over the legitimate functions of government by staging a coup so that his lawfully elected successor could not take office. What we have, Bob and I wrote in the 50th anniversary edition of All the President's Men, a new foreword, largely about the criminal president, Richard Nixon, and the criminal president, Donald Trump. And the greatest danger is obviously from Trump. What is he? He is the first seditious president in the history of the United States. A president who...
All right, Right, now we're really going to make the point clear. I don't have time to do it now. And one more in this bite, I'm just going to tell you, and then we're going to move on to some other stuff because I want to finish the show a little earlier. Woodward is going to refer to the Eastman memo. So understand what they are talking about here is Jack Smith's coming indictment. They're not talking about the boxes hoax. And what did he say there? What's the sedition? What's the sedition? Right? It's not the riot. It's none of that. It's the idea that once the popular vote was called for Biden, that Trump did anything. That's where they're leading you to, right? I want you to understand that. That's going to be the new January 6th. Hey, when the AP calls it for our guy, that's it. Now, if they call it for a Republican, you can do anything you want. But if they call it for a Democrat, that's the end of it. And I did not misspeak. I did say the AP. All right, so here's Michael Luttig. He's going to do a similar thing. And again, you have to understand this is coordinated. You got one of them's MSNBC, the other one's CNN. You think they'd be competing, quote unquote. Why would we cover the same story? But nope, they are. It's all orchestrated. Here we go. Here's Luttig. Just listen to the cadence, what he has to say, everything about this guy. The only thing they had to have somebody that was a former federal judge appointed by a Republican, as if you can't be a liberal Republican or you can't have changed your stripes over the years, but that's what they did, and this is all they could come up with. It's really sad. And again, if it weren't outright propaganda, you wouldn't be able to go with somebody like this, but here he is.
On any given day over the past 2.5 years, Donald Trump could have avoided and prevented these prosecutions. He didn't want to. He wanted to be indicted and prosecuted for his conduct on January 6th.
So just think about that, folks. I mean, and when I first heard it, I was just like, what? I mean, this propaganda is not even good. I mean, I could write better propaganda in my sleep. Really? Oh, so that's the way it works. Yeah. I went and murdered somebody. If I wanted to avoid it, I just shouldn't bring it up. And then I'm going to get away with murder. It's no problem. It's the same thing with the boxes. They'll talk about if he had just given back the boxes. That's not how any of this works, folks. He either broke the law or he didn't break the law when he took them. The fact that he didn't give them back doesn't mean you didn't break the law. It's just propaganda. Anyway, it doesn't make any sense that if he had just shut his mouth, we wouldn't have come after him, but whatever.
So instead, for 2.5 years, he dared, taunted, and provoked both DOJ and eventually Jack Smith to indict him. And finally, Jack Smith had no choice but to indict the former president, lest he make a mockery out of the Constitution and the rule of law.
Okay, so again, the opposite is true. What happened was January 6th, the Democrats, it probably was a false flag event, but we don't know that, so let's just set that aside, right? I believe, and I've written on Substack, greatamericanmail.substack.com, greatamericanmail.substack.com, and I've written several, like 5 or 6 articles about it. The best evidence is, because they knew about Trump trying to challenge the certification, which is what January 6th was really about. They knew he was going to do that as early as November. So it looks like they came up with a way so that it couldn't be challenged, so that there was no chance to follow the law. And nobody knows how it would have turned out. I'll be honest with you, I doubt they would have been able to pull it off, but they had every right to attempt it under the law. Is the way the law works. And we'll get to the law in a minute. But anyway, what happened was they couldn't let it go. So then the January 6th committee got formed. They didn't do a very good job. And if we were still a country of laws, when you saw the January 6th, and by the way, if you go to YouTube or Rumble, you can, I live streamed all but one. And the one I didn't do it in live time, but I did it afterwards. We go through it. And as it was happening, it was just bomb after bomb after bomb. They were all terrible. They didn't have any evidence. They couldn't put together anything. They had to lie, cheat, and steal the whole way. They don't have anything. But that put a lot of pressure on Democrat people, and it put it out there in the atmosphere. And unfortunately, that atmosphere has become so bad, and the echo chamber so bad, that eventually people were going, hey, and I'll give you a perfect example. Early on, when they started prosecuting people, it was about 6 months into it. Finally, somebody on the right started chirping around about, hey, you know what? You keep calling this as a coup, right? And no one's been charged with seditious conspiracy. And the prosecutors in D.C. said, yeah, that's true. And then literally within weeks, all of a sudden, they started adding charges, seditious conspiracy, going back to the people that had been charged before and adding that charge. Your Honor, I move to amend the charge here. What would you like to do? We want to add seditious conspiracy. So again, the truth was they never had filed it because no one thought it was that. No one thought they could prove it. Then when people pointed that out as a way to debunk the idea that it had been a coup, they added it. And this all this is. Same thing lugged there. All Jack Smith did was he succumbed to the pressure to not obey the rule of law. All right, so here's Circleback Psaki. And folks, she's got a show on MSNBC now. She's going to cover the same January 6th stuff, and then we're going to move on. But folks, I want you to imagine you think you're watching a news network, right? You're watching MSNBC, all right? And who do they have as an anchor? Somebody who literally worked for the administration in charge. How then could you possibly ever believe you are getting news? I needn't hear any more. She may be the greatest journalist ever known to man. She may be Walter Cronkite reincarnate. She could, but you just can't do it. But they can. I mean, Simone Sanders, who ran Crazy Bernie's campaign, she's got a show. These people are radical leftist, and it's obvious to anybody. But in this particular instance, again, just like the professors earlier, she too is conflicted because she only came to power to be the White House press secretary based on the election of 2020. Who is she to complain about the election of 2020? I know she feels that way because she feels like she won, quote unquote. Anyway, here's her story.
So on Friday, Judge Aileen Cannon announced that the trial in the classified documents case is set to take place on May 20th of next year. If you just did a little bit of math there, you're right. That falls smack in the middle of the heat of the 2024 presidential campaign, which means that Trump could already be the presumptive nominee by the time he goes to trial. Not only that, it means he could be convicted, even sentenced, before Election Day. This raises all sorts of questions, and frankly, they're questions that we as a country have never had to grapple with before.
All right, now, real quick, folks. So that's them responding to the election interference stuff. Well, we've never had to No, let me help you out here, circle back. It's very simple. The qualifications to be the president of the United States, natural-born citizen, 35 years of age. Done. End. Done. Natural-born citizen, 35 years of age. You can be convicted felon, and guess what? You can be locked up in prison. Guess what? You're on the ballot. You can be elected president. Guess what happens when let's just say hypothetically what she says happens. Trump is sitting behind bars, right, in Florida. He's been sentenced to 8 years in prison, blah, 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 blah. Election day happens. He's elected. Come January 20th, when he's to be sworn into office, you go get the key, you let him out of the office, he takes the oath of office. You cannot have the president jailed. And this would also apply to state charges, folks. This is the law. No one's ever questioned this, ever. It's the basic law. And then he will take office, and he will serve whatever. I guess he cannot run again based on the Constitution. So he would serve 4 years in office, and is the moment January 20th, I guess it'd be 2025, I guess, right? January 20th, 2025, the marshals will come up there, they'll get him and drag him right back down to Florida and put him right back in prison to finish the rest of his time in jail. That's how that works. There's not a question to it. Yes, he can be on the ballot. Yes, he can be elected. Okay, now, the reason I think she went through that, it raises all these questions that we don't know. Yes, I learned that in law school back in the 90s. Hate to break it to you, Jen, but that's the way it works. Oh, and by the way, as soon as he's elected president, guess what he can do to all the federal charges? Boom, pardon. He can. Yes, you can pardon yourself. That's what he'll do, obviously. But anyway, just get that out of the way real quick. Now, he can't pardon himself for state charges. Just FYI, in case you wonder, he cannot do that. Anyway,
we're going to try to.
She's going to now shift. So she's already kind of, we're not doing election interference. This is new stuff. And they all want that. Trust me, folks, because you're going to hear, if he gets the nomination, the trial won't go forward on the May. I've already debunked that. There'll be motions to dismiss the charges, and they'll have to go up on appeal. And even if they're expedited by the 11th Circuit, which they probably won't even be, but if they are, they won't be able to do it. They'll never make May. They'll never make the election. But this is all setting them up. So in case it does, they can say, oh, well, I mean, we've never faced this before. Can a convicted federal person be on a ballot? I don't think so.
Into some of those today on the show. Also this week, Special Counsel Jack Smith informed Trump that he is a target.
See, she's done the whole circle back, shifting to January 6th. Why is everybody talking about January 6th?
In the January 6th investigation. And I just want to have a sidebar on that for a moment, because I'm guilty of this too. We all need to stop shorthanding this case as the January 6th investigation. And here's why. Because as vicious and violent as that day was, and it was both of those things, the insurrection was the culmination of a coordinated attempt to steal the 2020 election. The loud physical attack on the Capitol followed a quiet, months-long attack on the rule of law.
So to break that down for you, real simple. Zach, stop talking about the violence. Stop talking about the violence. I want you to focus. This is now the third person. The middle Ludwig, he didn't so much do it, but the first one did. Big time. Right? Eastman memo, let's focus on this. Here she is again. They're all framing this for you. They're like broadcasting it. Focus on the coup, the challenge, right? This is different, folks. It's slightly different than the way they've painted it before. Take a listen.
Democracy itself. It involved creating slates of fake electors
there you go.
Pledged to Donald Trump in states he had actually lost. It involved attempts to co-opt the Department of Justice to promote. So
again, folks, how did you, if you actually lost, then the objections wouldn't be sustained. Anyway, so I just wanted to point that out to you. So we covered this. We definitely covered this on the weekend show. If you want to get it, I spent a little bit more time with it. But Trump had alternate electors from 7 states. And the idea is, based on the Electoral Count Act of 1877, if you can get a senator and a congressperson to sign a written document objecting to the electors from a state, they can be disqualified or they can pick one or the others based on the fraud. There's a historical precedent. 1876 election, this happened. It happened at others. I'm not going to get into a long, I've done it in other places. If you go, we did a whole breakdown of January 6th. It's pinned to the Twitter feed. In fact, if you want to go to it, you can find it right there. Anyway, folks, that's what they're going to charge him. And I want you to understand what they're talking about. Their view is it's just this simple. Once the AP calls the election, that's it. All the other stuff is a mere formality. It doesn't mean anything. That's not what the Constitution says. It's not what the Electoral Count Act of 1877 says. It's not what it says. You have to go through all these different processes. And you know what these processes are here for? They are checks and balances to absolutely push back against the potential corruption or fraud that might happen. Right? Just because the AP says you won, we got to check through all these other things. And you got to through all this other gauntlet. What Trump did was not only not a coup and not sedition, he was absolutely practicing constitutional governance. We should have been able to look at those 7 states closely. Did you change the rules on how do people vote? Did people vote falsely? We should have been able to do all that if we're truly a constitutional republic. The backstory here is they want to convince you that that's not only not how it works, but that's actually sedition. Why would they do that? Well, the answer's obvious, folks. They want to cheat. Hey, don't you know, the AP calls the election. That's it. That's it. Yeah, I understand the whole January 6th thing, but that's just a formality. That's just a little ceremony we go through. That doesn't mean anything. I know the law says if you can get a senator and a Congress, and he had 8 senators, including Ted Cruz. He had 137 people in the House. It wasn't a small group of people. It wasn't just Jamie the Rascal Raskin who stood up in 2016 and did the same blame thing. And nobody's talking about criminalizing him, right? That's why they want to do it. And it's an obvious tell. If Biden got 81 million votes, why do you care? Oh, yeah, sure, Ted Cruz. You want to object? Object all you want. You want to have some debate? Sure, we'll go do the 2 hours of debate. Come back, right? Objection denied. Move on, Ted Cruz. That's what you do. The reason they're doing this is to completely rewrite the Constitution without having to go through the process of doing it. Anyway, how are they going to do it, right? Great American Male, how are they going to possibly do that? We got a rule of law here. You got to go through a grand jury. Well, let's go back and look at one of the ones that Jack Smith and the letter he sent to Donald Trump, one of the laws he quoted that said Trump is a target of. Section 18 USC 1512 C2. 18 USC section 1512 C2 reads as follows. The person obstructed, influenced, or impeded, or attempted to obstruct, influence, or impede an official proceeding in the United States and did so corruptly. That is so vague, I can make anything a crime. And just so you think I'm kidding, right? It obviously was an official proceeding, right? It was an official proceeding because they were opening up to do the Electoral Count Act, right? And they were going to open the ballots and count them. So that's an official proceeding in the United States, right? If I think he did it corruptly, that's in the mind of the beholder, right? That's easy. I think it was. Here's all I got to prove now. So I've already got 2 of the elements in the bag. Got to prove one more. You either obstructed, influenced, or impeded, or attempted to. 4 ways I can prove it. Do you think this podcast today might influence something that's going on out there? You think so? Absolutely it does. Everything influences it. Now, obviously, a person of good faith, and that's a term in the law you learn very quickly, right? Because if you're not of good faith, there's no point in talking to you, right? But if a person of good faith would go, well, obviously that means like an overt act. I mean, if you're going to obstruct, influence, or impede, or attempt to do it, I mean, obviously that means like capturing a senator, or capturing Mike Pence, or doing something, paying somebody off, right? But not to them. They'll go, where does it say that? It doesn't say that anywhere. Doesn't say that anywhere. And by the way, I got an email, and thank you for the email. If you want to email the show, Publius@GAMcast.net, Publius@GAMcast.net. You might want to look up Publius. It has some serious historical underpinnings. But anyway, if you email me, I will read the email. So somebody emailed me, and they pointed out, must be an attorney, because I don't know whether they would know it, and they said that obstruct, influence, or impede likely is defined somewhere in the statute, and that my and that I was reading the statute wrong. Here's why you're wrong, listener, and I appreciate your listening, and I really appreciate the question. Please send me more. I love it. I don't need to read the statute. First off, I don't think it does anywhere define those terms, but even if it does, it doesn't matter. For Jack Smith's purpose, they do this all the time, right in front of you. They just read what I read you, and they go, that's the law. Well, obviously, the way I read it isn't the way you would read it if you had it any sense, but they don't do that. They're going to count on the fact that you're not going to dig deeper. So anyway, I got two more stories, and looks like I'm going to be 45 minutes today, which is, I think, a perfect length. All right, so folks, while all this narrative nonsense is going on, and unless you listen to a show like this, you won't even hear about some of it, and certainly sometimes unless you have a lot of historical underpinnings, you won't know the story behind it. Real governance is going on. Real things are happening in our lives, and they're not good. Example, today, Twitter was rebranded from Twitter to X. I couldn't care less, but whatever, people care. Anyway, the new president of Twitter, Linda Yaccarino, X is the future state of unlimited interactivity, centered in audio, video, messaging, payment, banking, creating a global marketplace for ideas, goods, services, and opportunities. Powered by AI, X will connect us all in ways we're just beginning to imagine. Okay, so they're rebranding Twitter. You should know that. And this is what they think Twitter is going to be. It's going to be a one-stop shop for everything. By the way, Elon, please, I want the podcast to be hosted here. I don't want it on some of these other places. So if you could do that, great. Help me out a lot if you can. But anyway, I tell you this. Ted Lieu, who is the communist from California, who basically, I don't know how he got his job. He does nothing useful for anybody. What the Twitter CEO described below is called the internet. Au contraire, Ted. Au contraire. And I'll tell you how I know this. Since I rebooted the podcast, I was doing something, I forget which day it was, but I was doing some research and I wanted a Kamala bit. And so I went to the Google to find the Kamala bit. And the problem with Google is, one, there's suppression, and two, it'll tell you what it thinks they want you to know. And that's not what I want. The Kamala bit that I want. I couldn't find it. So finally, I went back to Twitter and I literally tweeted Twitter just like I would usually treat Google. Like, just put in the terms to find the data. Bam, it popped up. You know why? Because it's free speech and because it's not trying to manipulate me. It had enough things. Oh yeah, here's what you're looking for. Here's the bit. And I found it. Trust me, folks. Twitter, because of the freedom of speech, if it stays on this path, it will overtake Google, Facebook, all these other people. That's one of the reasons they're so mad about it. Okay, folks, seriously. Anyway, so now you know the stuff on that. The last thing I'll leave you with is, and I say this all the time, while we're distracted by this stuff, and it is absolute demagoguery and propaganda, while we're distracted, real things are happening, and they ain't good. So here's the story. Wait times for Americans who have applied for new or renewed passports have jumped multiple times this year. Applicants are currently waiting 10 to 13 weeks. Okay? Otherwise known as over 3 months, to receive new passports unless they pay an extra fee for an expedited process of 7 to 9 weeks. Translation, folks, they can't even do the basics, right? This is something the government should do. Forget about climate change. Forget about the gender stuff, folks. Can you flip and build the roads and the bridges? Can you pave the roads and the bridges? Can you get me a passport? No. It's going to take me over 3 months, and you better thank your lucky stars they even give it to you at all. Oh, and by the way, if you want an expedited process for something you were supposed to do anyway, we want more money. You think that stuff's going to go away? You think it's going to get better? It isn't going to get better until the media, right, and the Democrat Party get in line and start doing something real. When people go, I don't want to hear about Trump. How long has it taken to get my passport? 13 weeks is too long. It should take a week. Anyway, that's what's really going on, and I could have done a bunch more stories along those lines if I had wanted. Anyway, you are now all caught up to date with all the news of the day, and if you enjoyed this live stream / podcast, I hope you tune back in tomorrow.